Welcome to i-TUTOR Economics NCERT series. We will begin today's class from the topic we stopped last time. So let's continue. Earlier we discussed why fewer women appear in employment statistics. Now let's understand an important issue: unpaid work by women at home and on family farms. So, what is not counted as work? Household activities like cooking, cleaning, fetching water or firewood, work on family farms where women help plants, harvest or tend animals, care work like looking after children, elders or sick family members. Even though these are productive activities, they are not recognized as work in official statistics because they do not earn wages. And also, there is a consequence for this narrow definition. What is that? Underestimation of women workers. The number of women contributing to the country is much higher than reported. Without proper recognition, government programs may not target women effectively and their needs may ignored. Think about the women actively engaged in these households and farm activities. Why do not get paid? Should their work count as employment? How would including them change our understanding of women's contribution to the economy? Yes, these activities are essential for the household and economy. Recognizing them as work helps in better policy making, empowerment of women, accurate measurement of workforce participation, and so on. So this is a step towards gender equity in employment statistics. Okay. So in the last class we learned about worker population ratio, which tells us how many people are working in a country. But this ratio does not tell us everything. For example, who controls the work? Are the workers self-reliant or dependent? What is the quality of their employment? To answer these questions, we need to look at the status of workers. So there are two broad categories of workers. What are they? Self-employed workers and hired workers. Who are called self-employed workers? They run their own business or work independently. For example, farmers, small shop owners, artisans, freelancers, and so on. They have authority over their work. They make decisions and keep the profit. What about hired workers? They work for someone else and are paid wages or salaries. For example, factory workers, clerk, construction workers, etc. So though they usually have less control over decisions and depend on the employer for income and work conditions. Why is this distinction important? It tells us about the quality of employment in a country. Self-employed workers may have more autonomy but uncertain income. Hired workers may have job security but less control. Understanding this helps policymakers design better programs for improving workers' life. To understand employment in India, it's important to know the status of workers. Not all workers are the same. Their role, income, and job security differs. For example, construction industry. Let's take three types of workers: cement shop owner, construction worker, and civil engineer. Cement shop owner, they own and operates the shop. He makes decision about the business. Their status is self-employed. And the key fact is more than half of India's workforce is self-employed. What about construction worker? He works on other projects, paid wages for the work done, and his status is casual wage laborer. About 33% of India's workforce are casual laborers. What about civil engineers? They work for an employer and paid on a regular basis, and their status is regular salaried employer. Only 50% of workforce are regular salaried employers. Why this distinction matters? It helps us understand quality of employment. In self-employment, they have autonomy but income uncertainty. For casual laborers, it's insecure, low wages and no benefits. For regular salaried employers, they have stable income but less control. So it is crucial for policies on social security, minimum wages and labor laws. Now that we know about self-employed, casual wage laborers and regular salaried employees, let's see how these categories are distributed among men, women, rural and urban areas. Let's look at the gender-wise distribution. Major source of livelihood for both men and women are self-employment. It's account for about 50% of the workforce for both genders. What about casual laborers? It is the second major source for both higher for women than men. For women it is 37%. What about regular salaried employers? For men it is 18% and for women it is 8%, because regular jobs often require higher literacy and skills, which limits women's participation. What about rural and urban areas? In rural areas, majority are self-employed or casual wage laborers. Many rural people own plots of land, so they are self-employed farmers. And what about urban areas? Regular salaried jobs and self-employment are more common. Fewer casual laborers because of factories, shops and offices need regular workers. So the key insight is rural employment is more informal and dependent on land or farming. Urban employment is more formal, skill-based and diversified. When we study employment, it's important to see how labor shifts across sectors as a country develops. People gradually move from farming and rural activities to industries and services. So, as economies grow, what happens? Workers move from agriculture to industries to service sectors. From rural to urban areas, migration occurs to find industrial and service jobs. Eventually, services grow faster than industry, taking a large share of total employment. What about industrial division? Economists divide economic activities into 8 divisions. What are they? Agriculture, mining and quarrying, manufacturing, electricity, gas and water supply, construction, trade, transport and storage, services and services. So major sectors include divisions like primary agriculture plus mining or quarrying, that is secondary manufacturing plus electricity, gas, water consumption, service traders plus transports and services. So this grouping helps in simplifying analysis of workforce distribution. So the key insight is the primary sector employs a large proportion in rural India. Secondary and service sectors dominate in urban areas. Tracking shifts over time help us understand industrialization and urbanization trends. Now that we know the major sectors, let's see how India's workforce is distributed across them, both in rural and urban areas. In primary sector, we know primary sector is the main source of employment for majority. Okay, so primary sector is the main source of employment for majority of workers in India. Secondary sector provides employment to only 16% of workforce, and service sector provide employment to about 24% of workforce. That means India still depends heavily on agriculture for employment. What about rural employment? Rural workforce depends on primary sector, and secondary sector provides employment to only 10% of rural workers. Service sector provides 13% job to rural workforce. So the observation is agriculture dominates rural employment. Non-farm opportunities are limited there. And what about urban employment? Primary sectors, they are very small in cities, and secondary sector it is 30% and service sector is more in urban areas, that is 60%. So key insight is cities rely heavily on services, showing shift from farming to modern economy. So there are some key takeaways. In rural India, agriculture dominates employment. So there is a need for diversification and rural development. In urban India, services dominate, reflecting industrialization and growth of knowledge economy. Then secondary sector employment remains low overall, signaling scope for industrial growth. Now let's look at how men and women are distributed across different sectors of employment in India. Both men and women work here, but women are highly concentrated. More than 75% of female workforce is in primary sector. More than 75% is on workforce is female. For men, only 50% works in this sector. So women have limited access to non-farm jobs. Agriculture dominates their employment. Then what about secondary and service sector? Men have more opportunities in secondary sector and service sectors. Women's participate in these sectors is significantly lower. Gender gap exists in access to diverse and higher paying employment opportunities. So the key takeaway is women are overrepresented in agriculture, which often means lower wages and job security. Then, men have greater access to industries and services, providing higher income and career growth. Then, this reflects the need for policies promoting women's participation in secondary and service sectors. Let's now understand how employment and the economy have grown over time in India and what it tells us about the structure of jobs. Over 50 years of planned development, India aimed to increase GDP and employment simultaneously. Between 1960 and 2000, GDP grew positively. Though there were fluctuations, it grew positively. Employment growth was stable at about 2% per year. So the key insight is GDP growth was often faster than employment growth, indicating that economic growth did not always create proportional jobs. When GDP grows faster than employment, it suggests jobless growth. When GDP grows faster than employment, it suggests jobless growth. That means growth without adequate creation of employment opportunities. Jobless growth means growth without adequate creation of employment opportunities. And also, when GDP grows faster than employment, there is a need to focus on employment intensive sectors like agriculture, MSMEs and services. Therefore, stable employment growth reflects slow but steady job creation. Fluctuating GDP growth shows economic vulnerability to policy changes and global trends. Development planning must balance economic growth with employment generation. Okay, let's look at varying trends in India's employment scenario during late 1990s and understanding its implications. During late 1990s, employment growth started declining. Okay. Reaching levels similar to early planning stages. Meanwhile, GDP continued to grow, creating a widening gap between economic growth and job creation. So this phenomenon where the economy grows but employment does not increase is called jobless growth. What is called jobless growth? Economy is growing but there is no increase in employment. Economy is growing but employment does not increase, and it is called jobless growth. So India was able to produce more goods and services without generating proportional employment. This indicates that growth was increasingly capital intensive. That means relying on technology and mechanization rather than labor. So jobless growth affects different sections of the workforce unequally. Certain sectors like services and high-tech industries may grow rapidly while traditional labor-intensive sectors lag behind. Understanding these patterns help us know what types of jobs are being created and who benefited from them. Now let's examine how employment in India has shifted across sectors over the last few decades. Let's look at some employment indicators. Two key indicators to study are employment of people in various industries and status of workers. That means they are self-employed, casual or salaried. Majority of population lives in rural areas and dependent on agriculture. Development strategies aim to reduce dependence on agriculture by creating jobs in non-farm sectors. So there is a shift from farm to non-farm work. Primary sector from 1972 to 73, 74% of workforce were engaged in primary sector. And in 1999 to 2000, this proportion has declined to 60%. This shows a decline in people depending on farming. In secondary sector and service sector, we can see that it increased from 11 to 16% for secondary sector. That means it indicates more opportunities in industries and manufacturing. In service sector, it increased from 15 to 24%. That means it reflects growth in urban jobs, knowledge economy and services. Overall, there is a substantial shift from agriculture to industry and services, showing a structural transformation in the economy. Now that we have seen how workforce distribution has shifted across sectors, let's examine another important trend, the change in the status of workers over time. So workforce can be classified as self-employed, regular salaried employed and casual workers. Self-employed, regular salaried employed and casual workforce. Regular salaried employed means they own business, farms or shops. Self-employed means own business, farms or shops. Regular salaried employees means they are fixed regular wages. Casual wage workers have temporary work and daily wage jobs. So there's a trend over last 3 decades, that is from 1972 to 2000. From self-employment, what happened? It shifted to people have moved from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage workers, and from regular salaried employed to casual wage workers. Despite this shift, self-employment still remains the largest employment category. So now let's understand a concept called casualization of workforce. Scholars call this phenomenon casualization. It means more workers are engaged in temporary, insecure jobs instead of stable employment. So what is called casualization? More workers are engaged in temporary, insecure jobs instead of stable employment. So what is its implication? Vulnerability. Yes, they are highly vulnerable. Okay, casual workers have low job security. Then there is income instability. That means daily or seasonal work may not provide steady earnings. Also, there is limited social protection. They often lack benefits like pension, insurance or healthcare. Therefore, I will tell you once again, casualization, we learned that casual wage workers has increased over the decades. This reflects a shift from stable jobs to insecure temporary work, making workers vulnerable. Okay, since independence, India aimed to provide decent livelihood for all. Industrialization strategy intended to move surplus workers from agriculture to industry and provide better living standards like in developed countries. So despite 55 years of planned development, 3 out of 5 Indian workers still depend on farming as their main livelihood. Industrialization did not absorb enough rural workers, so a large informal workforce persists. Okay. Now, formal and informal sectors of Indian workforce. So, in the previous section, we have found that proportion of casual labours has been increasing. One of the objective of development planning in India since India's independence have been to provide decent livelihood to its people. It has been envisaged that industrialization strategy would bring surplus workers from agriculture to industry with better standard of living as in developed countries. We have seen in the preceding section that even after 55 years of planned development, 3/5 of India's workforce depended on farming as their major source of livelihood. Now, economists observe that the quality of employment is deteriorating. Many workers lack benefit even after working 10 to 20 years. Why do some workers do not get maternity benefit, provident fund, gratuity and pension? Private sector salaries are often lower than public sector salaries for the same work. And what about regular income and worker protection? Only a small section of India's workers get regular income. The government protects this section through labor laws. Workers in this section can form trade unions, bargain for better wages, access social security benefits and so on. Now, let me tell you about the classification of workforce. Okay, we know about formal sector and informal sector, right? Formal sector includes all public sector establishments like public sector establishment. Private sector establishment with 10 or more hired workers are also called formal sector, or public sector establishment, and those private sector establishments which employ 10 hired workers or more are called formal sector establishment. Workers in these establishments are called formal sector workers. What about informal or unorganized sector? It includes millions of farmers, agricultural laborers, owners of small enterprises, and people working in those enterprises are also self-employed who do not have any hired workers. So informal sector workers lack social security and labor protection. And what about formal security workers? They enjoy social security benefits like provident fund, pension, gratuity and so on. And they earn higher wages compared to informal sector workers. They have developmental plans expected that with economic growth, more workers would move to the formal sector. The informal sector would shrink over time. What about the reality in India? Contrary to planning expectation, a large proportion of workers continue to work in the informal sector. The formal sector has not expanding enough to absorb the growing workforce. So, the chart shows the majority of Indian workforce is still in the informal sector. So the implication is many workers lack social security and benefits, income inequality exists between formal and informal sector, then vulnerability of informal workers remains high. So those who are working in formal sector enjoy social security benefits, they earn more than those in informal sector. Development planning envisages as the economy grows, more and more workers would benefit from formal sector workers and the proportion of workers engaged in informal sector would dwindle. Okay, in the informal sector, male workers account for 69%. Okay, that means I will tell you once again, the total workforce is 400 million. Okay, total workforce, formal versus informal sectors in India, approximately from 1999 to 2000, 400 million total workforce are there. In formal sector, there is 28 million workforce. So the percentage of total workforce is 28 divided by 400 into 100, that means 7%. Sorry, 17%. And what about informal sector? There is 372 workers in the informal sector and the total percentage of workforce is 93%. Male workers in informal sector is 69%. So the key observation is the formal sector is very small, employing only 7% of the workforce. Women are underrepresented in the formal sector, just 17%. The informal sector dominates India's employment, highlighting job insecurity and lack of social security. Then there are some challenges and recent initiatives in informal sector. Characteristics of informal sector workers and enterprise are: employment does not provide regular income, no social security or legal protection, then enterprise often use outdated technology, workers often live in slums or informal settlements, and so on. And government and international efforts are also there for this. Since late 1970s, attention has shifted towards informal sector workers due to slow growth in formal sector employment. The International Labour Organization or ILO, International Labour Organization, ILO has influenced India's approach. Recent measures include modernization of informal sector enterprise and also provision of social security measures to informal sector workers. Now, there is informalization in Ahmedabad. There is a case study about that. I'll tell you it. The background is Ahmedabad was a prosperous city. Okay, Ahmedabad was a prosperous city, and largely due to over 60 textile mills employing 15,000 workers. Workers enjoyed income security, living wages, health and old age benefits, and strong trade union support. So there was a crisis in 1980s in this Ahmedabad. Closure of textile mills began in early 1980s in Ahmedabad, lasted about 10 years. Over 80,000 permanent and 50,000 non-permanent workers lost their employment. Many were pushed into informal sector, losing prior job security. So the consequences were economic recession and social disturbances, including communal riots. Then middle class workers fell into poverty. Then social problems emerged like alcoholism, suicides, and children being withdrawn from schools for work. Okay. Now let's understand about unemployment. Let's look at a definition of NSSO. NSSO defines unemployment as a situation in which all those who owing to lack of work are not working but either seek work through employment exchanges, intermediaries, friends or relatives, or by making applications to prospective employers or express their willingness or availability for work under prevailing condition of work and remuneration. Okay, let me tell you once again. Unemployment occurs when people do not have work despite actively seeking it. Seeking work can include responding to newspaper job ads, approaching friends or relatives, then visiting factories, offices or employment exchanges, expressing willingness to work under prevailing conditions, and so on. So the key point is people in rural areas may simply stay at home when there is no work. Economists define an unemployed person as someone unable to get even 1 hour of work in a half day. So the key takeaway is unemployment is not just about being idle. It is about actively seeking work but being unable to obtain it. So there are some sources of data on unemployment. There are three main sources. First one is census. Report of census in India. Then NSSO, National Sample Survey Organization report, and the final one is Directorate General of Employment and Training data, or DGET data. So Census of India report. It provides information on population, workforce and unemployment at a national and regional level. It is conducted every 10 years. What about NSSO report? It focuses specifically on employment and unemployment situation. It collects detailed sample-based data on type of work, duration, sector and status of unemployment. Then, what about DGET data, or Directorate General of Employment and Training data? It is based on registration with employment exchanges. It provides information on people actively seeking jobs through government channels. So the key point is each source gives different estimates of unemployment. Together they provide insights into characteristics of unemployed people like age, gender, education, location and so on. Okay, now let me tell you about the types of unemployment. Do you know about open unemployment? What is called open unemployment? People are actively seeking work but cannot find any. For example, someone going to factories, offices or standing in marketplaces hoping to get daily work but not getting any. Now, what is called disguised unemployment? This occurs when more people are employed than actually needed in a job, especially in agriculture. For example, a farmer has 4 acres of land. Only 2 workers plus the farmer are sufficient to work the land efficiently. But if the farmer employs 5 workers plus family members, the extra workers are not truly needed. So the effect is they appear employed but their contribution to output is negligible. So the historical data suggests that about 1/3 of agriculture workers in India during late 1950s were estimated to be disguisedly unemployed. Okay. Now you know about open unemployment and disguised unemployment. Now what's about seasonal unemployment? What is called seasonal unemployment? It occurs when work is available only during a certain times of the year. It's common in agriculture as farm workers depends on seasons like Kharif and Rabi. For example, many rural workers migrate to cities during off-season to find temporary jobs. They return to their villages when the next agriculture season begins. This is a common form of unemployment in India. Now, what about long-term or forced unemployment? Do you know about forced unemployment or long-term unemployment? Okay, in India, due to economic necessity, people rarely remain completely unemployed for long. They often accept unpleasant, dangerous or low-paying jobs in difficult conditions. The government tries to generate acceptable employment with minimal safety and job satisfaction through initiatives. So now let's look at the government and employment generation. National Rural Employment Guarantee Act of 2005. It provides 100 days of guaranteed wage employment per year to adult members of rural households who volunteer for unskilled manual workers. Not the point, rural household, 100 days of work and all adult members. Okay, the targeted groups are families living below the poverty line, and the objective is to ensure a source of income for rural households and reduce rural unemployment. And the key point is NREGA, or National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, is one of the several government initiatives aimed at generating employment for people in need, especially in rural areas. Now, government employment generation, or government contributes to employment in 2 main ways. What are they? Direct employment and indirect employment. Direct employment and indirect employment. Direct employment, government hires people directly in various departments for administrative, operational or service purposes. For example, running government offices, transport services, hotels and industries. Provided direct jobs to workers employed in all these sectors. And what about indirect sectors or indirect employment? When government enterprise increases production, they create demand for inputs and services from private companies. For example, a government-owned steel company increases output, suppliers of raw materials and buyers of steel also expand production. More employment opportunities are created indirectly. So, in direct employment, workers employed by the government itself, and in the indirect employment, jobs created in the private sectors due to government activity. These programs are designed not only to create employment but also to provide essential services in rural areas. These programs are designed only to create employment but also to provide essential services in rural areas. So they are often linked to poverty alleviation. Okay. And the key areas covered are primary services, that means primary health, primary education, nutrition and so on. And also rural infrastructure and housing, that means rural shelter, construction of buildings, laying rural roads and so on. Then income and employment assistance, that means assistance to buy income generating assets, development of community areas, development of wastelands or degraded lands. So the key idea is these programs provide wage employment while simultaneously improving social and physical infrastructure in rural areas. Now let's go to the conclusion part. We saw the changing nature of employment in India. There is a shift to service sector. New jobs are increasing in the service sector, often linked to high technology. Then small scale enterprises are specialists now work alongside with multinationals. And also companies outsource departments to small firms or businesses. The traditional office or factory models is changing. Home is becoming a workforce. Then employment is becoming more informal. Limited social security is available to most workers. Then there is jobless growth, that means GDP has grown rapidly in recent decades without a corresponding increase in the employment opportunities. Then what about government initiatives? To address employment challenges, especially in rural areas, the government has launched employment generation programs. So the key takeaway or the final conclusion is economic growth does not automatically create sufficient employment. Structural shift in the economy and the informalization demand policy intervention to secure decent jobs, social protection and equitable participation in the growth. So that's all about this chapter. Hope you understand. Thanks for watching. For more related contents, do like, share and subscribe.